Okay, in this installment that I'm going to show you, I want to talk about mystery cults. You know, the thing about mystery cults is that not many, if very few, know of the teachings that were done in mystery cults. Quite often it's mulled over. They tell you they had certain ceremonies, but don't know what they were all talking about, what they were alluding to, and so on. The common person didn't get to know these things. You had to be initiated in, and then on the fact of that, you still had a long way to go before you got to learn it. And they had crafted it in such a way that whenever you were new to the cult, you would learn things that would totally open your eyes to the difference of what was told to you before and the way that it is now. Yet it was the same thing, only larger and even grander than before. This repeatedly happens during your initiation as you go through the levels. When you reach a certain level, you are taught a certain thing that almost takes everything that you had learned from them and previous and throws it out the window as something that people were enamored with the idea of, and so created everything that you've been told up until this point. But at that point, you are shown a greater mystery and a kind of envelope of it all, and in doing so, you were able to discern how this all came to be. Kind of a strange thing to go through, and then to stand there realizing that most of the sheeple that are standing around you in any situation are totally unaware of the reality of it all, and have been told something to believe that even in the time of the inception of it wasn't its initial intent, as to say. Here I'm watching a show, and that's what sparked me to do so. I felt like maybe trying to critique the whole thing. I doubt I'm going to be able to show much of it. In fact, I'll probably get flagged for some of it. It's called, Is the New Testament Based on Myths? Pagan Christ by Timeline. I want you to look it up and watch the whole thing. I'm going to try to show you a few key points and talk to you about some of it, but it would be better if you got the whole flavor going on, for they walk you into it and initiate you into the idea of what's going on all the way through it to a point, and then start making more valid points, kind of like the initiation that I had talked to you about before. Let me preface in saying that I'm not trying to destroy anybody's religion. Christianity is the favored religion of the land. All the Abrahamic religions and things that go with it. I've just tried to show that while discerning other cultures and finding out some of their mystery cults, that it all seems to go together. And even though you believe that they are pagan, and that's bad, which just means agriculturists, which all these people were that had this idea. And there was a concept that rose out of that at the end that has us under a fog that we're still under 2,000 years later. And the reality of it all is actually that it did not start off right whenever you think that it is and you're told to think that it is. If you get in any studies of it, there's nothing that actually says that this actually even happened during the time or shortly after, whenever it happened. I'm sure I'll get some comments downstairs. I don't mind that at all. But in truth and reality, it's been woven into something totally different. If you watch this whole presentation that I'm only showing you a portion of, then you'll probably understand a little bit better. But understand also, this is one of like 12, that sacred number, different views on the same thing that I've done. Pretty much as the zodiac goes around the sun, I've stepped into each zodiacal zone and said, well, this is a different view on that same idea. And here's the Sumerian tales that are woven into your Bible, and here is that. And so it actually, if you're just paying attention and you know about history, you instantly come to the realization that all these people weren't the people that we come out trying to think that they were, and it's much bigger. And it talks about 10 tribes and so on, and that makes it things like there was little groups of people, but each one was a giant civilization, and actually. And in a way of honoring them, they still kept a lot of it in the stories, and in a way also to get the new people to believe in the new story that was being told. It ironically contained a whole lot of the stories that you were always familiar with. So it made it a little easier. They're like, well, you know this story about da-da-da. Well, it's kind of like that, and how that goes with this is so on. Admittedly, it's an incredible book. It's got so much jargon in it, it really confuses people, and they try to take little pieces and say what each one means. But if you'll look and read between the lines, there's a lot more to it than even its own book, and it's done in a threefold way. It's really incredible. And it was done to be so. And once these people finally got the form that we know of today and wrote it down, it no longer could waver around at all. And it became, this is the story that you tell in this way. And all others are instantly thought of as BS. When you talk about atheists, well, funniest comment I've heard in a long time, and it still is whenever we talk about an atheist and they try to pin people down and da-da-da and everything, and you don't believe in this God or whatever, that the one that they believe in. And the comment is made, no, you know, better way to explain it is, you know all the pagan gods that you just don't believe in? I just have one more. But then again, if it ever was anything, it all is. There's a problem in that statement too, but let's get on to this and look at a few statements here of things in mystery cults, which I believe you're going to recognize a lot of the fanciful stories of. You know, until we had actually the Rosetta Stone, which they talk about in this, people were going off pictures and ideas on the ancient Egyptians because the language had become lost. Just like cuneiform. And after that point, and of course it was done on purpose, by the way. And after that point, it only takes a generation or two and no one would be able to decipher it. You start criticizing and going against the people that are even trying to hold on to it at all, and it doesn't take very long before it withers away in the wind and you don't understand it anymore. Like the Tower of Babel concept idea, in a different light though. Let's look at a few of these statements.
The myth. And the myth is about a dying and resurrecting God-man, or son of God. And if you look at the story, you see that this God-man is born of a virgin and God, sometimes on the 25th of December. He changes water into wine at a wedding. He performs other miracles. He has 12 disciples. He teaches a doctrine of love. He upsets the status quo, the religious authorities. He's put to death at Easter, sometimes through crucifixion. If you look at the cover of our book, there's a picture of a figure that looks like Jesus, but it's not.
You would, looking at this depiction right here, just know for sure that that is a depiction known of Jesus. But the weird thing is it predates it by at least 400 years. And I don't know if you can see it in the very bottom of the picture here, but it says back key. I believe this is the mysteries of Dionysus and Bacchus. But you see a dying man on a cross. Now, there are things that have been around since pre-Egypt, pre-Sumerians, that are all still woven into this tale. And we're unaware of it. If you don't go into deep studies on this stuff, you won't even find the little glimmers that people have found of it. But those were kept and entrenched into all the different people that were affected, that heralded civilization, and they all seem to have this common tale, don't they, when you really start looking at it. And although the names have changed to protect the innocent, lo and behold, it's still Venus, it's still Saturn, and that planet is still the same one that we know of today. But it's also associated with a storm god. I did a series on storm gods like 2 years ago. It's a complete series on them and the amazing correlations and how they're the same person in the same aspect in each one of these cultures, showing you that there was a major thing going on before that. The things we call pagan now and all that, there was a major thing going on before that. The thing is, there are glimpses inside of that of all stories that are in the Bible, and it's said to be going along with this, showing you that they tried to wrap it around and put it all in together as one story, and it is much larger than the story that we give credit for. It's one of the things I've tried to show over time, and people have gotten that misconstrued somewhat, but look up at how much larger it is. This, again, is only one aspect. When he talked about the 12 disciples that he has, that gets repeated over and over again, and a lot of people don't understand. A lot of these numbers and things are meant to show you who was attached to this concept, where it comes from, and so on. And the 12 number is very different than our based on 10 that we have now today, and it's a Sumerian thing, based on 6 and 12 and 60 and so on. Like they got way past tens. Tens was a kid counting on your fingers and so on. They got to where they could do it real easy. So they are also shown to have trigonometry, advanced mathematics going on with their ideals and everything. There's a Plimpton tablet that shows you this. So what we were led to believe and how much these people know and so on is really a farce also. They all had it going on real well. In fact, because of the hiccup caused by the Dark Ages, we're actually led to believe that the people came out and finally woke up and stuff. But they were around long, tens of thousands of years, where the people already woke to a spiritual concept that we can even find in cave art and so on. You really can't embellish very much on it and say how much they had going on. You don't find too many artifacts, but there's a Lion Man of Hallfell's cave that shows you they had a Leo man type thing going on way back when. And Venus, who I recently talked about on somebody else's video, showing the earliest predomination of anybody with braids, for she has finely braided hair. And it's the Venus of Willendorf, and some of these Venus statues date back to 35,000 BC. They were kind of heavy women back then, but that was because of a difference in that too. I have a video on that topic. Let's just go on here as we look at this and know that this has nothing to do with Jesus whatsoever, but yet it does.
It's this pagan dying and resurrecting God-man. And then, of course, he comes back from the dead, and if you want to commune with the God-man, you take bread and wine symbolizing his body and blood. But that's not Christianity. This is paganism pre-Christian.
So again, the idea, you know, the mysteries that are associated with different people like Mythras, and we've talked about that before. In fact, you can find that guy that was just talking there, the bald man, showing you that there are Mithraims that were created all through at the time where their own beliefs were changing. They were leaving behind the gods of the Romans and the Greeks that we know so well, that our planets are named after and so on, and trying to embrace it in a bigger light, something much larger, something that would involve even beliefs of Druids and Celts, all the way the people of North India, all the way through Russia and to the edge of what we call China today, all the way through North Africa and Egypt, and these common Caucasians that had this concept going on. I don't know if you can make it out. It's been destroyed by zealot Christians, by the way, after the fact, whenever they talk about they were all pagans and these are the people that took our people into bondage, and all these things happened in Egypt, which, if you really look into it, didn't actually happen. In fact, one major idea that I've been able to show before so many times is that if you'll just look in the Hebrew Bible under the idea of the Red Sea and how they parted the Red Sea and went through, you know, the biggest magic in the Bible, right? Doesn't even say that. It says Sea of Reeds. Yam Suf means Sea of Reeds. And they went through the Sea of Reeds, and this is a total different way. And the Hyksos actually did take that trek, but of course, changing that one little thing and then making an embellished story out of it takes it away from it, but it still keeps an essence of it, doesn't it? You can still smell it. Do you notice that this man right here is tied up, crucified, and so on? And, well, this is in Egypt. In fact, the story we're talking about in one of the mystery cults that we're doing today is about Horus and how it matches up.
So we are inside this temple. We call it the bear's house or the bear's room. So here in front of us, some scenes showing us.
In the Temple of Luxor, ancient hieroglyphs describe a mythical mystery tale about a divine conception, or what Tom Harper claims to be a virgin birth.
Well, it's not exactly like you think of in the Bible. But then we've also shown the idea of divine twins, and I recently did a video showing you that even in Jesus' name, or his brother's name, Thomas, that his duality name that they give there, both of those mean twin in Armenian and ancient Greek. So he's supposed to have been the brother of Jesus. In fact, that's the reason that they had doubting Thomas check his wounds, because he's supposed to be a twin. So many times said there have been twins. So is the idea that she had twins? Maybe one made it, one didn't. A Cain and Abel story ensues. One was left. That gets found a lot of times too, where there's a brother. You can find an Egyptian where there's a brother, this, that, and the other that takes over and so on. It's not necessarily exactly a rule. Well, he died. Whoopsie. How'd that happen? But the idea of a virgin birth, as far as the Isis tale, becomes as easy as the fact that Horus was dead, and in a lot of the tales he was dismembered and cut into pieces, sometimes 12, by the way, and thrown to the masses, and they couldn't find his penis anymore because a fish had eaten it, which is actually a zodiacal tale. And so they fashioned one, a fake phallus, out of gold, and then Isis, as a bird or a dove, lit upon it, and whenever she just sat upon the top of it, she became impregnated with Horus. Again, a rebirth situation. You think that's not valid, but it's as valid as anything that you probably believe in right now or have been told to. So look at these pictures on the wall and where this story comes from, and see if this sounds familiar.
where a mother delivers a child in a cave and 3 sages come to visit the infant deity. It's remarkably similar to the story told at the Church of Nativity, except this one predates it by almost 2,000 years.
And so in a cave, she was supposed to be trying to make it back to the temple, and she didn't make it to the temple. She shouldn't have never left, and she should have had the kid at home. But instead, she tried to make it to the hospital. And, you know, back before we had cars go zoom and everything, you put a woman in a wagon going bouncing down the road while she's breaking her water and so on, and you're not going to make it. So they had that in a cave, and then 3 sages show up. But that's part of the 12 sages that he has. And that's the part of the zodiac that was in a cult whenever that happened, are hidden. A cult is not a bad thing, like, ooh, Ronnie James Dio and all of this stuff. That's something we contrived. Just like we did the devil and everything else. Because it makes kind of sense. If you have this, then you have that. If you have opposites. But then that says there's another god too of the underworld, or he has a counterpart too. So there's not just one, is there? Well, there's a conflagration to take Asherah, God's wife, and his son, and Jesus, and make him as one. If you really look into it, that's the Canaanites and the way that they went with El, the god of the Bible. You know, they have angels. You live in a temple, the Tower of Babel. All the angels' names, Ezekiel, all the names that are El in your Bible are Elisha, which actually means El is Yah. It just says it. But if you don't know, you don't know. But they put them all as one. It was a pantheon. It was the one God to believe in these things that these people were saying there. What do they have to do with Samaria? Samaria got destroyed in a great flood, if you've heard about it. Tale of Gilgamesh and everything, and those people were attacked by the Elamites and brought in over, and then Assyria took over and so on, if you will, or Akkad. And it changed, but where did those people go? They went the route of Abraham. You're supposed to discern this idea that it all happened, but people usually, whenever they talk about the Bible, think it all happens right around this one little spot. And it doesn't actually involve Egypt. Oh, well, yeah, it does, I guess. And it does involve Samaria. Well, sure it does. And in fact, whenever he got sent back to find a wife for him, the text tells you don't buy one from this Canaanite locals, which is trying to deflect from what the reality was, and pick one from my home tribe or whatever. It's one of the famous stories in the Bible. He shows up and he just knows at her, talks to her at a well, and throws an earring in her nose. There's a lot to that. Let's continue here for a minute.
Standing in one of the panels is the pagan god Horus.
Very important god, because also this god had the same bears or the same house.
In the text that accompany the image of Horus, the falcon sun god of protection, Harper found references to the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, and the Son of Man. All
Those do sound familiar.
well-known biblical references to Jesus.
And also in the same time, his uncle.
So whenever you see an idea like this, and he's a sun god, as per the sun disk that's on top of his head, this is actually a blend of times from way before, from back in the last ice age. I tell you, people have remnants from so on, and they talked about how they had brought something advanced from Atlantis and so on that you talk about, but what they also still had is remnants of animism, where they had different gods with different aspects, and because they picked that out of nature. This can be seen in the concept of a nativity. Well, they say, well, she was out in the wilderness whenever this happened and everything. No, in the story you have, she was in an inn, and there was no room in the inn, so she had to go out into the stables idea. But that actually conflagrates two more people into the story too, is now we got 4 or 5 going on. But wait, there's more.
He claims 180 similarities between Horus and Jesus Christ. Horus is referred to as the Christos, or Iusa. His virgin mother is the goddess Isis.
Wait.
Now, whenever you see these depictions of Isis and a baby and so on, people can try to write it off and say, oh, that's just her and a baby and this, that, and the other. And you go, yeah, that's her and a baby. And a real similar story from thousands of years before that got a chance to be embellished by people that had a better storytelling idea and went on with that. And that's not it, actually, for it got passed on into a few different religions there and then flopped back out again in the baby Jesus story and his divineness. She has a sun disk on her head over there with the cow horns from the time of Taurus. We've talked about and everything. Well, why is she black? What's the deal with that? And all these people trying to claim that they knew that Egypt existed whenever they didn't. It's just a symbology of death, of the darkness, or the opposite. You know, when the sun's up here and it's noon, it's dark on the other side of the planet. And they kind of had that concept onto it, and all colors with the zodiac and its concept. Whenever there's a good portion of it you can see in the sky right now, there's some that's occulted right there. And because they're doing that, they're going through the underworld, under and over. But some of these statues, and I even did a video which, you know, this is a little more depth of that concept here, whenever I just rambled for about 2 or 3 minutes, showing you that there was an Isis sculpture that they had in the Vatican, and somebody had actually put a new headboard or footboard around the very front of it, where it actually says it's Isis, and covered that up with another footboard and said that it was Mother Mary.
And she got this baby Horus. She carrying him like in the same attitude, like the Virgin Mary and the Christ.
The images of Mary and the images of Isis with Horus on her knee were interchangeable. And in some churches today in Europe, they have a grotto in the bottom basement of the church where you will find a black Madonna. And the black Madonna is Isis and Horus.
Horus.
So, that man that was just talking there is actually an ordained priest, and he's also a best-selling author too, now that he's come to realization and actually studied into it. If you'll watch the whole show, he actually talks about how he never even thought to question it because so many people were so enwrapped into it. He himself was, that he never thought to question it. But once he saw a few things, it was like, what? So he looked into it, and then a few more things opened up to him, and lo and behold, he ended up finding out how much bigger it really is. And the best of my knowledge, he's just making a bunch of connections to Horus. He doesn't make all the other connections that I do for the Bible. The idea that Titus was the second coming and so on, but you can look up Flavian signature and you can find them talk about that and give you most of the representations of it. And also show you that Titus's campaign mimics Jesus's campaign all the way through, and in fact a lot of the tales that it tells about something very similar going on. And Jesus feeding the people at the wedding and so on, and had to do with fish, has to do with Pisces, but also the fact that there was one time whenever they went down there in the army or whatever and took over all the people because of this disruption, they were able to feed the masses to keep things going.
This is just one of many such gods. Harper found evidence of dozens of others. Some of them can be found in the Christian shrine at the Coptic Museum in Cairo.
And they all have similar careers. They all have supernatural births. They all are persecuted. That was an allegory or a symbol for the fact that each one of us, when we're born, we have the spark, the gift, and it's threatened that it'll be covered over by materialism, by animal passions, by whatever.
So he kind of gives it away right there. One of the greatest portions of the mysteries there is the idea that you were supposed to have been told that you probably didn't get out of Sunday school and so on, even though they may have said it a few times because of the way they push all this other dogma on you, which is built off of politics and things like that. That you have a divine spark inside of you because of this, because of something that happened long ago that kicked these people off, the Caucasians of the Bible, to end up becoming much more advanced very rapidly and so on, and they attribute it to God and having him create someone that's different than all these other people on the earth that you may run into, and that those people have a divine spark in them because of this. So it sounds like ancient aliens too at a point here, because they are talking about sky and star gods and so on like that. And then, like the Sumerians say, they come down to earth and so on. It's right there in the stories. So if you want to look at it from that angle, you can get that easily also. But you see this angel over here on the left and the idea of a halo, and you think, oh, see, that's just Christian, but it's not. You can look at any Sumerian or any of these people all around the Near and Middle East, if you will, and they all show a depiction of this idea of that you get to become a bird. And that stems from something from way back, before any recorded time or any of these civilizations that go on here that I've shown in other videos, to where they used to put people up on a dais and let them be picked clean, and then those animals, mainly buzzards, that's why you still see a vulture or buzzards, if you will, on the Egyptian headdress and uraeus, this concept of this bird that can fly all the way up and take you to heaven. And that these people all around here had the idea that heaven was this super place in the clouds and a concept, and that they could go be with the gods, and they were in the same position in the same places. And you can get all overzealous and say that, oh, well, all that was people trying to figure it out, and then we finally figured it out. Well, we finally figured out that this wasn't necessarily true in what we are led to believe now. So what we've twisted it up to in the year 2022 now, to what we have believed and trying to be inclusive to all kinds of people and so on, wasn't really a rationale, really wasn't something that was necessarily true. There are a lot of things woven into one, just like the lamp holder over here at the right of the angel, you can see as a depiction of a hexagram at the bottom part of it that's made out of squares, and then something that conspicuously looks like a swastika up above. And then above it is a castellade put on top of castles that we recognize from medieval England, but it's put backward as the downward facing way, almost to keep people out of heaven instead of allow them in. But if they don't understand what the truth in all of it is and the way you're supposed to look at the situation, and you're left in the dark, and you're left in a modern day to believe that all you have to do is believe this that they're telling you. Just believe that Christ died for it and everything, and go with it, and if you do, they won't kill you. Well, that's something from persecution that was going on all the way through the Dark Ages and so on, from the time of Christ, whenever you hear about the people being taken to the Colosseum and so on. But they'll tell you here shortly, that flipped. That turned into something much different. And in fact, it was the Christians that went around doing all kinds of mess with it, including smashing the noses off all of the Egyptian statues, because they had a belief that they were missing a part of it, that defaced them. Or they'd take them and just slam them down, and whenever they did, the thing that was poking out the most of their face when it smacked into the ground was the nose, and a lot of those went that way too. No, Napoleon didn't do anything to the face of the Sphinx. In fact, he found out And we know now that, of course, it was an Islamic from earlier before that who caught their women giving gifts to the Sphinx in hopes during a drought, apparently, and that pissed them off. You try to worship any other gods back then, and people were killed and persecuted for it to where you just succumbed to it, and then you told your kids to, and everybody did it to the point that after a few generations you didn't hear but a whimper hardly anymore out of anybody. And then you wait a few more, and if you heard a whimper, you take those out, and it all just goes away, didn't it? Well, good thing in a modern day we have all this technology to be able to study these things. The problem with this subject is, of course, this subject. And so you're not allowed to rationally talk about it and show the truth and reality of what actually went down and what we're told to believe versus what was even going on. Hopefully we're coming back into a state that we can have a little bit of free speech about these type of things. People have been writing books for hundreds, if not thousands of years on their thoughts on this, and up until a modern time, they felt like it was okay to kill you and take that away and burn it so nobody got to hear it. Quite often whenever they take somebody's tongue away, it's because they're afraid of what they're going to say.
Next door to the Coptic Museum is one of the oldest churches in Egypt, St. Mark's. This church commemorates the journey taken by the Holy Family, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, when they fled persecution in Israel.
If you study the Bible, this is something they call typology, where it happens over and over again, where somebody ends up fleeing into Egypt, and then they tell them after a while, what happened in the Old Testament, they tell them it happened after a while, that those who sought your death are no longer living, and then you'll be able to go on and off of it, whatever. But Jesus just mocks that point again. There's a whole lot of times where Jesus just mocks that point. In fact, the Gnostics always referred to him as Yahshua, Yeshua, which there was no J, but now we have it Joshua. Well, no, Joshua was a guy from the Old Testament. Yeah, we all know about Joshua and Jacob and things. So that's who that was. Oh, wait. What? Gets pretty deep, but let's continue with what they're saying right here in this oldest in Egyptian churches and the Coptics and so on.
What you're relating to is God or the universe or the mystery of life via this particular figure. It's about understanding the wisdom that the story embodies of death and spiritual resurrection and experiencing it for yourself so that you discover the Christ within you.
Again, they say it blatantly, straight out forward. Most people, it just brushes right off or goes over their head and you don't understand it. But the idea is that we all have this spark inside of us to be somewhat holy. People around here have these wristbands they have on. I live in southern states of the United States, and I guess it's really gotten around quite a bit. They have these little bands that are like the Armstrong bands people put out for a long time for Lance Armstrong, but yet they say WWJD, and it's what would Jesus do? It's not we want Jack Daniels. And you're supposed to, in the moments that you're looking at it, what would Jesus do? If you were supposed to have been all forgiving and all these things and turn the other cheek instead of acting a fool. So agreed, it has really helped out humanity to come to the point that we are now with a lot of its morals and so on like that. But at the same time, it was pounded into people, and if we really look back at it, Jesus wasn't a historical character. He was actually a mythological character. The book is a faith document. It's not a historical thing. It has some history things into it to try to attach it. But yet, scholars, well-known biblical scholars, have gotten to this point many times. I've shown you a Yale scholar showing you comparative religion. Let's continue.
St. Mark's Church was built during the earliest days of Christianity. It was a time when Christians were divided in their beliefs. One of the factions was a mystical sect known as the Gnostics. And
Gnosticism just means hidden knowledge. Just like a cult means the same thing. When the moon is in a cult of the sun, that's an eclipse. Just like Apocrypha and how we think that means the end of days and everything that goes on, it really means something to be revealed. And all these people had these extra documents that are no longer a part of your Bible. Many have heard about some of these. And in doing so, they left out a lot of the mysteries and the concepts, because that's an Apocrypha. They were supposed to, in that, show you something like an Aesop's fable that shows you a mysteries that you were supposed to make an understanding to, but they don't want people to have that. In fact, if they whittled it down to where we have it now in the 27 books, basically, that keeps it to a finite story that we're going to constantly keep telling, and that's the way it's going to work. It's what we're under today, but that's not even the way it started out in the first place.
unlike other Christians who believed in a flesh and blood Jesus Christ, the Gnostics believed Jesus, or Joshua as they knew him, was a pagan sun god.
Oh no. Well, Jesus is a pagan sun god. The sun dies symbolically every year as it falls 1 degree per day until it reaches its lowest point near the Southern Cross constellation. And then it starts rising again 3 days later to save all mankind from the death of winter. This is a seasonal tale that we go through every year. We call it Christmas. And of course, they, to conflagrate the thing, have turned around and said, well, he was born in December and everything, but he was crucified at the time of Easter. But Easter is an equinox, which means equal night. In the time where there's the death of winter and the darkness of winter and less light per day as it goes, there starts to be more and more, and all of a sudden it becomes equal of the day. Yeah, these people mathematically had it all figured out in time and everything, and they figure it out. And so he's said to die, but then resurrected at that point. Well, that's at the point the sun reaches its high azimuth and goes through the whole thing of the year. So it's the same similar story. You can see the people that were involved with it.
You know, there was a major battle for the soul of Christianity in this period. And the Gnostics lost, and the literalists won.
So, in its inception, if you'll catch what he meant right there, in its inception, it was the mysteries, and it was never supposed to have been something that was taken from the date that we give it even today. It was something that came on from much earlier. In fact, whenever you go back earlier, oh, they already had that. Oh, they already had that. Like I'm saying, it comes from much earlier in the concept here. But that's all Gnosticism and all secret mysteries that are told to you in a way that you're supposed to learn if you're initiated, and the common man didn't get to know it and everything. In our modern day, they released the book eventually on us here as a closed source, but there's so many open sources still that are there. Once we found the Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls and things, and realized that, yeah, there's a whole lot more to this. The people that were doing it at the time, there's a whole lot more to it. And in fact, during their persecution, where they were killing everybody and trying to burn anything what it said to keep it safe, they put them in urns and took them out in the desert and hid them. And they hid them good enough that we didn't find them until our modern time, and all of a sudden there is an apocalypse or an unveiling. One of the statements or the mottos of my site here is the unveiling. And I'm trying to unveil it to you in a way that you can accept it, hopefully, in the way that things really are, and the way they really came to be where we are today.
All through history, it has been the winners in any battle or any struggle that get to write the story and get to write how it happened.
Joshua, as it would have been, Jesus is just the Greek name. The Joshua cult probably goes back 200 years at least before the time that we think of as Jesus being born. And
Whoops. Well, yeah, the Joshua thing, in fact, you look at the Old Testament and they had that idea around, but he's supposed to have been a warrior type guy. Jesus is totally the opposite of that situation. Well, if you look into it, in the Old Testament, they were looking for a guy that was named Emmanuel. We still say it in our Christmas songs to this day, and that's not who showed up. But Emmanuel also shows you that somebody named El. And they're going to kick these people out that keep taking us over, whether it's people from Upper Anatolia that have done it some, or the Egyptians riding all the way up through, or if it's the Greeks, or now the Romans. And that's the time we're talking about. But the idea of that comes from way back in those ideas. The Greek, if you will. Hundreds of years before.
And so to really understand the nature of Gnostic mythology, you have to completely get away from the idea there's just the story we have in the New Testament. The Gnostic Gospels, of which we now have a large number, said you had to write your own Gospel to show you were initiated. So you can imagine how many there must have been.
You can imagine if once you became initiated to a certain point, you had to write your own gospel. Now, of course, not all the people reach that point. Not everybody that's a Boy Scout gets to end up being a Life Scout and go to explorers, if you will. But when you're initiated and you get to that point, you actually have to make your own gospel. So you can imagine how many gospels there were by people that were well aware of all the mysteries at the point that they wrote their gospels. And when we find these Dead Sea things and Nag Hammadi texts, you can find that they're radically different than what you're taught to believe, aren't they? But if we took and mushed that back into the story somehow and took out a few key phrases in other places, the Bible becomes a totally different story. This is the end of part 1, and top left-hand corner is going to be part 2. You click on it right now and we'll take you to there, and we'll see you there. Write a comment and click like down there. We'll see you there.